In Service to Love, the relationship podcast that helps you create more love in the practical day-to-day, centering connection in the life of the modern family with your host, therapist, mother, and artist, Randé Dorn. Hello, welcome. This is Randé Dorn, and this is the In Service to Love podcast. Welcome. I'm just so you know, these are all being recorded visually, and at some point soon they will be released on YouTube. I'm saying that because I'm looking at myself and I'm like, you're so cute. I'm enjoying my own visual. I'm being silly. Anyway, today is not a silly topic, but it is the topic of boundaries. Yay! I always say that because I get excited about talking to you all and sharing what I know and sharing what I've learned, right? Like these aren't all just things that just kind of popped in my head. Boundaries are so important. They're so necessary. So let's define them first. What are boundaries? They're something that indicates, right, a border or a limit, is how they might be defined in the dictionary. How I define them, especially when it comes to relationships, is that boundaries are the rules of engagement. How am I supposed to treat you? Where is the line? Where is the cutoff? Boundaries are also around heavily connected to consent, and I'll mention that also a little bit later. But to just keep in mind that boundaries are the rules of engagement. How do I relate? How do I engage with you? Those are the boundaries. Can also think about kind of like the container around you. I'm thinking of it as its own kind of like moat, right? Its own kind of wall. And why do we need boundaries? And maybe for whom do we need boundaries? And why is this conversation around boundaries important? I think, certainly when we're talking about consent, when we're talking about consent around our own bodies, especially when we're talking about consent around intimacy, when we're talking around even just consent to have a conversation. If someone knocks on your door and they may, once you open the door, hello, greetings, they may ask, may I come in, right? That is a form of consent. How do I know I have to ask for consent? Because there's a door and there's a fence and there's a wall and there's a lock. So first of all, boundaries are everywhere, right? What I would consider the rules. So let's start there. They are everywhere. That's why we have fences. That's why we have passwords. That's why we have locks. That's why we have, borders, boundaries, all the things that we set up in our lives to, in some ways, define our preferences, define how we want you to engage with us, define this is where my home is, this is where my room is, this is where, these are the edges. Where are the edges, right, in our lives? So we have them everywhere. And I'm saying that out loud right now because I think sometimes we can get really afraid to own our boundaries. We can feel really guilty sometimes when we are being very clear about where our boundaries are. So I have a little bit of a list of things, and so I'll be bouncing kind of back and forth around these. But the first one is, I'll start there. The first one when we're talking about boundaries is believe someone when they show you themselves the first time. And I got this from Oprah, who I think got this from Maya Angelou. So if I'm misquoting, I apologize. I guess I could have done that research, but why? Sorry, that's not something where I want to put my time. But I do want to honor the fact that has been really a staple in my life since I heard Oprah say it at one of her conferences that I went with my best friend to, probably over 20 years ago. And why is this so important? Because we show ourselves pretty immediately, right? Who we are, how we kind of operate in the world. That doesn't mean that we can know someone deeply in those first interactions, but in those first interactions, we've talked about values before. In those first interactions, if we have our three main values and we stand on them, you can get, if you're really observant and you ask the right questions or just observant, you can get a sense of someone's values. So when you are noticing or observing, part of what I want you to think about is this person, and number two, what I would consider a boundary crosser. If you learn nothing else from this particular podcast, please take this statement away with you. Boundaries are for boundary crossers. They are not necessarily for your neighbor who has a key to your house, who helps to like feed your pets when you're out of town. Boundaries aren't necessarily for people who, if you say, uh-oh, you've crossed the line, you've crossed my boundary, or uh-oh, I realize, that doesn't feel good to me. And the other person's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that. I will remember that next time. I apologize, right? That you can feel and understand from their intention that the ways that they want to relate to you are from a place of respecting you, your desires, how you want to be treated. This is all about trying to understand and articulate to the people in your lives and to the world how you want to be treated. So we need boundaries for everyday folks, right? And most everyday folks want to respect you and your boundaries. But the main reason for boundaries and for these rules of engagement is that boundaries are for boundary crossers. Boundaries are for boundary crossers. They are for the people who want to climb over your fences, who want to break through your locks, who want to take your things, who want to touch your things, who, want to, you know, climb over and crawl over and take over and not who have no desire to necessarily respect where the lines are, and whose intention is to feel entitled to your space, your things, your body, your feelings, X, Y, Z, more, right? So when I say boundaries are for boundary crossers, then the other thing that you need to think about or remember is that boundary crossers are not about trying to help you hold your boundaries. That is your job. And part of what we do preemptively is that we build that fence. Part of what we do preemptively is that we put in that very difficult to figure out password. Partly what we do is, in certain situations we create space, right? We move away from people. We create space in crowds. That's why we have homes. That's why we have walls. That's why we have locks, right? So there's a lot of things that we might do preemptively to kind of set ourselves up to feel protected. Because what do boundaries do, right? They help us feel safe. They help us feel safe in our world. They help us feel safe in our lives. They help us to feel as if, right, like I can move from a place of I want to say a flexibility and agility, to feel more freedom, because there is a shared understanding of what the rules are. when we're driving in our cars, there's a shared understanding of the lines, of the lights, of the signs. So there's an expectation for all of our sakes, but there's an expectation that you will follow those rules, those boundaries for your safety, but for also for mine. And I'm following those rules also for my safety and for yours. So, why I'm emphasizing this idea that boundaries are for boundary crossers and that you are responsible is because how we sometimes get into these experiences of feeling awful, uncomfortable, or guilty when we're setting boundaries is because boundary crossers, that's their job. That's their job, is to make you feel awful for holding the boundary, for saying, no, 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 like, please don't call me after 10 o'clock at night. No, you can't stay here more than 3 days. No, please don't touch me there, or I'm not ready to go that far in our relationship yet, or I'm not ready to define us in this way yet. Boundaries, you think about like those children who are throwing that tantrum in the store because you've set a boundary. You said, "No, I don't wanna get you that thing today." And then they throw themselves on the floor, and they're crying, and they're making a huge scene, and, you try and maybe, like, pick them up or convince them to, like, let's get going, and they're not having it, right? Like, they are trying to break through your boundary. They are trying to make you feel so uncomfortable, so embarrassed, so guilty. How dare you do this? I thought we were close. I thought you loved me. I thought we were best friends. I thought, all the things. It is not their job to hold your boundary for you. We would love that. And again, I really believe the majority of us in the world want that for each other. We want to feel respected, and we want to respect someone else's boundaries. Boundary crossers don't have that incentive because whatever it is that they want, that they feel entitled to, they feel entitled to make you feel so uncomfortable that you give them what they want. And so our biggest boundaries in some ways, the ways that we move about the world that create safety for us. I think that there's sometimes this illusion that, like, if I just name the boundary, if I say this is the boundary, that people will keep it. And if they are, fighting and protesting the fact that this boundary exists, that when we kind of crack under those circumstances, that we get mad, right? That we get mad that someone crossed it, or we get mad that we cracked, that we relented. And so I want you to really to understand that this dynamic is on purpose, and that if you want to hold particular boundaries, and most of our I don't know what to consider like our main boundaries, they don't really change, right? Again, the walls, the fence, there's these structures that are in place that don't really shift in our lives, right? This is what I might also consider like deal breakers. They don't really shift in our lives. And so to just know that, I mean, I think what's really difficult to for those of us who might be people pleasers, it might be difficult for us to strengthen ourselves to the point where we start to own our no's. And our no's are what defines where the boundary lies for many of us. And yet, I'm going to keep emphasizing it is your responsibility to do that. And again, the majority of folks are going to help you. They're going to say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. Of course. Thank you for letting me know. And even as I say that, I want to back up and say, we may not always know where our boundary is until it's crossed. Because, as we're going through our lives, as young people, and then, maybe we are in partnership or longer term partnership, maybe we have children, we get into different, places in terms of our career. Maybe we're living in different places that have us access different traditions and cultures that because of our own ignorance, and our ignorance meaning just a lack of experience in our lives, we are going to come up against situations where we are saying, "Oh, I didn't realize that that was a boundary until it was crossed." And there's an opportunity there, right, to have that conversation and to have it from a place of I'm going to keep saying this, vulnerability, but from a place of kindness and dignity. This is something that I say often, kindness and dignity. Because I think again, we can sometimes get so flustered and so upset or even sometimes so outraged when a boundary has been crossed, one that we may not have defined, and then we get so upset, with the person who crossed it, who is saying, well, but that wasn't a defined boundary until this moment. And can you give the grace in those moments? Can you see the difference between someone who has been clearly told this is a boundary and someone who stepped over a boundary that wasn't clearly defined? And that's probably why we're having this conversation, right? Is to say, one, you are responsible for your own boundaries, and then you are responsible for defining them to the people in your lives, or life and lives. And thirdly, you're responsible for holding them. If you have to keep reminding someone every day this is your boundary, then that's your job. And I know it sucks. I know it sucks because, again, the person who is making you say it every day is waiting for the day that you don't say it. It's waiting for the day. It's pushing, pushing, pushing until you get to that day where you're like, fine. Because the moment that you say fine, ugh, okay, right, is the moment that they come one step closer to the next level of boundaries that they will clearly, and you all know this, will want to cross. So, really thinking about, one, how do I hold, or like, oh, shoot, I'm responsible for my own boundaries. How do I hold them? How do I be responsible for them? How do I define them? And, how do I articulate them? Because the other part of this is not just knowing internally, inherently, what your boundaries are, and you will learn them over time. As I said, it's like we are always interfacing with an ever changing world and ever changing experiences. And we may get to this place where someone has crossed a boundary. I didn't know that boundary existed until it was crossed. Hey, I just realized this was a boundary of mine. I want to respect that for myself, and I'm going to ask you to respect that too. Hey, can you not do that again? And of course, most people are like, oh, wow, thank you for letting me know. But then you're, depending on who you are in your world, meaning this, I'm also doing this for the folks who may have a harder time owning where that line is, who may struggle with wanting to please the people in their lives, who may struggle with, and I want to articulate that in some ways the counter to this is people pleasing, and the counter to this is actually perfectionism. And why I say those two is that if I'm not defining my boundaries and and where they are, where that line is, I'm kind of making a circle, right? I'm creating that moat. If I'm not defining that, if I'm not creating that container for myself, then, and I have these kind of porous boundaries, then I am relying on the goodness of others to create safety for me. I am then relying only on how someone wants to relate to me as my basis for safety versus I'm defining and creating safety for myself. I'm saying where the line is. Instead, I'm relying on the nicety or the kindness of others to create safety for me. Can you please, if I'm good enough, if I'm pleasing enough, will you make me feel safe? That's what we end up doing. If I'm perfect enough, if I do the most perfect things, if I'm the perfect partner, if I'm the perfect wife, if I'm the perfect husband, if I'm the perfect worker, if I'm the perfect parent, then I don't necessarily have to hold the boundaries around how I want to be treated. I then just expect to be treated well because I've quote unquote earned it through my perfect people pleasing behavior. Does that make sense? Right? Like how if I don't define the container, then I have to rely on everybody else defining the container of safety for me. And for me to get the best outcome from that, then I have to perform in ways that would give me the best outcome. I have to be so liked. I have to be so loved for what I do. I have to be so uh, perfect that I can only expect goodness to come my way. And even as I say that, we both realize, right? You and I, we realize that it doesn't make sense. Because what does the thief care about how perfect you are? What is the person who feels entitled to all that you are, have, or created? In some ways, you become even more enticing, right? Well, then now I really need to be your friend because you're so great at baking cookies. Like, right? Now, now that you're so perfect at now I really want to stay at your house for that week. Now I really want you to buy me dinner when we go out. I never have cash on me. Now I really, because, right? So do you see how you being perfect and having no boundaries doesn't actually create safety for you? But that's what people pleasing is. It is allowing for ourselves to be defined by what someone gets from us. It's being defined by whether or not someone is so wildly happy or pleased with us and our behavior that they won't hurt us. That seems like so much work to me. As opposed to just saying this is my boundary and sitting a little bit with how uncomfortable someone else might make you feel. It's work either way. And I don't want to invalidate the fact that holding a boundary is incredibly uncomfortable. That having someone come to you again and again, why are you holding this boundary? Why are you not giving me what I want? Why are you not doing the thing I want you to do? Why aren't you being the person that I want you to be? It is work. But so is making cookies. right? So is running yourself ragged, trying to overfunction and give all the things and be completely depleted. What boundaries can also do, not only creating safety, but boundaries create reserves, right? It allows for you, I think of it as the container for your own freedom. If I create these boundaries for myself, this container, that within that well of safety, I'm home. I'm home in my body, I'm home in my thoughts, I'm home in my abundance. In I mean, that's what home is too, right? That we get to our own place, our own what we define as home. We kick off our shoes and we take off our bras and we stretch out our body and we laugh at the things and we tell all the stories that we couldn't say or tell while we were at work, and we get to be in our nature. We get to be in our comfort. The boundaries that you create for yourself also let you do that outside of the structure of home. It's like taking home with you. My no's also allow for what my yeses are. But first I have to really know, where's the line? Who am I in the world? What's meaningful to me? How do I define myself? How do I want to be defined? Because those are also boundaries. How I want to define myself, how I want to be seen. I'm gonna say in quotes, how I want to be branded. Those are boundaries. How I want to be treated. I have to stand up for how I want to be treated. And the more I can root and stand in what that is, the more I'll receive that outcome. So, knowing, believing someone when they show you themselves the first time, why I'm going back to that, and why I love going to that particular quote. Because usually when we get to that place where it's like, oh shoot, my boundaries were crossed multiple times, then I can trace back that I saw and, and recognize that person as someone who was going to do that in my life, who wanted to play in that contract with me, who is helping me to learn this particular lesson around this particular boundary. If we trace back, they say those red flags or yellow flags, we always know. We always know these people in our lives. And yet we allow for them, we invite them in. And some of that invitation is coming because they feel familiar to us, right? They feel like our family, our siblings, our parents, maybe ex partners, lovers, who we are often trying to work something out with. When our boundaries are crossed, especially at a young age, when our boundaries are crossed, it is so incredibly painful. It can be overwhelmingly brutal, especially physical boundaries, to have our boundaries crossed. For us to lose trust in someone, so damaging. And when I say lose trust is because usually when our boundaries are crossed, and I'm talking about the thief, I'm talking about the person who wants to, a stranger maybe, but oftentimes our boundaries aren't crossed by those people. Our boundaries are typically crossed by people who are close to us, who know us well enough to know where to push and to know that they will be allowed on some level to cross our boundaries. And And allow, I know, again, I know I'm kind of walking a very difficult line when I say that, because allowing is where, again, we're talking about consent. But when our boundaries are crossed at such a young, when we're young, it is typically, by someone that we trust. And so we lose trust in the person and we lose trust in ourselves. We start to mistrust ourselves in the sense that I must not be able to hold these boundaries, or there must be something about me that allowed for this boundary to be crossed. And I wasn't necessarily intending to go here, but I'll say a little bit that, when our boundaries are crossed by people that we trust at a young age, we have to typically try and reconcile that, because we still need to trust those people if we're young, right? Depending if it's a caregiver or someone who's close to us in our lives. And so for us to keep trusting someone who has crossed a boundary of ours, we have to make a decision. Then it's either them or it's me. And so what young people will do will say, it must be me. There must be something wrong with me. There must have been something that I did that where I deserved this type of treatment. Because it will be too hard to live under the circumstances of not trusting my caregivers who are still saying, or people who are close to me, that they care about me, that they love me. Again, it's what, boundary crossers do, is that they create these narratives that create a lot of internal mistrust and confusion for us, especially for young people. And so when then we get older, when I say we can back up and we know that some of the people in our lives who have continued to create um, these kinds of boundary crossings, is that they feel familiar. And partly what we are doing in these circumstances is that we're looking for a different outcome. So if I continue to have relationships, let's say within partnership, that remind me of maybe one of my earlier partnerships, that where my boundaries were crossed in very difficult ways, then I will continue to find new partners who recreate that dynamic for me, hoping that I'll get a different ending where I will be made whole, because they will do something different that will help me to reconcile the past, so that I say to myself, oh, it wasn't me, it was them. But instead, I just keep recreating the pattern. It must be me. It must be me. It must be me. So how do we break that pattern? We recognize people like, ooh, you feel familiar. And then we choose a different ending. We choose a different ending versus hoping the other person does the ending differently. And how do we choose a different ending? We set up new boundaries. And we hold the boundaries that should have been there in the first place. So when I say the boundaries are about the rules of engagement, and again, thinking about young people, there are some pretty well known rules around how young people should be treated, how young bodies should be treated. There's rules around, you know, don't hit people, don't steal things, right? There's things that are rules that are already in our society and our community that have already been set up before we existed, right? Before we were born. So there are the bigger rules that help us to work as a society, as a community. And then there may be rules within our culture, our tradition, and within our home. And so when we're young, sometimes the rules of society, we haven't heard them because we're only operating by the rules that are in our home. But as we get older, we start to get exposed, right, to all of these different rules. And if we grew up in a household, in a community where we were told we couldn't have boundaries, and then we're made to feel awful or guilty or uncomfortable around setting them, this transitioning into becoming someone who can hold boundaries, I acknowledge can be incredibly difficult. But I ask you, what's the alternative? And I say that, again, to the sense of you're listening to this because there's a part of you that knows that your life requires stronger boundaries. And that wherever those boundaries are lacking for you, that there's probably a lot of pain and chaos in those areas. And, I think like I said, I was kind of walking those edges probably around abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. But our boundaries aren't just for that, right? When I look at my list of like who are these boundaries for? Where are these boundary crossers? They're not just in intimate relationships. We have boundaries or rules, for at work, with our coworkers, with our bosses. Like, why are you texting me or calling me at 10 o'clock at night? Why are you sending me emails at 2 o'clock in the morning? Those are boundaries. Why are you asking me to work on the weekends? Or why are you even bothering me on the weekend if that hasn't been established as the structure or the parameter of our work? Our boundaries are for our partners, around what I'm comfortable with, maybe even in terms of intimacy, but what am I comfortable with in terms of how we spend our time, how we spend our money, right? Where we live, how we hang out with our friends, where are you going at night, where are you going on the weekends? Those are all rules, structures, boundaries of how we want to engage with each other. Boundaries around our children. Like I just said, it's like, all right, are they throwing tantrums in the store and you're allowing for them to do that on a regular basis? I mean, children have bad days, we all do. So, a tantrum here and there. Okay. A tantrum every time you go to the store and then they end up with your phone in their hand and a treat. How's that working out for you? Has that changed that behavior or has it encouraged it? Boundaries around how our children, are interacting with the world. Are they disrespectful to you? Are they disrespectful to other people who they should be showing respect to? How are they engaging with the home, with, the things that are there? Is there a certain level of boundaries and respect around that? How about your family who's just kind of showing up and doing things and saying things that maybe are inappropriate or not what you would want to establish in now your own independent home? We have things for strangers, right? We have the walls and the locks and the passwords. Those things should extend those types of safety protection should extend to the people that you care about. And then we need to have it in dating as well. Am I allowing them to come back to my house after the first date? Am I giving them way too information about who I am? Am I, you know, essentially kind of falling in love even though they haven't proven that they are worth loving in that way? Like, am I trying to people please the person that I just met? because I'm hoping that they will love me. I mean, isn't that what, right? Again, going back to people pleasing and all these people I just mentioned, coworkers and bosses and children. It's like, am I people pleasing because I don't want to establish and articulate and be responsible for boundaries in my life? But I promise you, as difficult as establishing these things are, oh, you will feel so much happier. Life will be so much easier. Because here's the thing about boundaries, right? It's like again, going back to the home. Once I know where your house is and where the walls are and where the room is and and where the fences are, then I always know where those things are. Oh, such and such lives on such and such street in this type of house. And they like for you to take their shoes off when you go and use a coaster and they don't like guests to stay no more than 3 days. And once you've established those boundaries of this is where I live and this is how I live, again, for the majority of the people who want to respect those things, there's so much freedom then to be able to relate to anyone who shows up in your life at your door. Because then they do take off their shoes. You're like, oh, now I don't have to worry about the floor. And then they do use the coaster. You're like, oh, now I don't have to worry about the furniture. Like, now I can just enjoy you because we have established the boundary. I said what the boundaries were. I'm responsible for them. I articulated them. You agreed to them because that's another level of consent. And now we get to play. Like, think about children. When we watch children play, it's like, what do they do? In the very beginning, they define the rules of play. I'm going to be mom and you're going to be the cat and we're playing kitchen right now. And, you like to eat the stuff off the cupcakes that I just made. And we're then going to get on a rocket ship, like whatever it is. Children are so clear about defining who they are and what the rules are, and then they play. And at some point, we lost that. In some ways, the ease of how easy our life could be once we define the rules of engagement. They're just the rules of engagement. And once I establish the rules, then we could play. Because now I feel safe. I'm in my freedom. And hopefully, because you've defined who you are and the rules, you feel safe and you're in your freedom. Do you see how much room we have to play in that? But if I don't want to articulate it and then I'm only pleasing and I'm like, well, what do you want to do? Or who are you in this scenario? And you're like, whatever you want. How do you want me to be? Like, that might be kind of fun for a little bit, but it starts to get not so fun. Because then I'm not only responsible for me, I'm responsible for you. I'm responsible for you always feeling safe around me. Well, remember I made you those cupcakes. So, can you spend the next 3 hours with me? No, because I have boundaries. I don't need to spend 3 hours with you because you made some cupcakes because you thought that was how we were going to be in relationship to each other. Define who you are. Define the rules of engagement. Define your boundaries so that I can relate to you properly. And in those places where I might cross your boundaries unknowingly, give me some grace and articulate what I can do differently next time so that we can continue to be in relationship to each other in a way that feels healthy for both of us. We're all searching for the opportunity to be free and to be seen in our audacious, alive, quirky, unique selves. I'm going to tell you that it's hard to see someone who is only operating from that place of people pleasing and perfectionism, because people who are doing that are only giving, let's say me, but us, but only giving me the experience of what they think I want to experience from them. And so I actually don't get to know who you are. You've locked that away. You hide that in your home where you do feel safe, wherever safety is for you, in a very isolated way. So then I don't actually get to relate to you or like you or even love you in a deeper way, because your offerings are from a very hypervigilant, observant place. What do I think? What do I think Randé? What do I think would make Randé happy? And then let me give that to her with the hopes that we can be in relationship. And that might feel good to me for a little bit. But then when I turn around and say, oh, well, what do you think this time? What would you like? How would you like to do things? And then I'm exaggerating, but it's like, and then I'm like, I don't know. What do you want? It, you disappear. I'm not able to see you. And so think again, these boundaries help to define you. It defines your space in the world. So going back on my list, so I was just talking. Something else that I wrote down is that boundaries need consequences. So if I'm going to hold the boundary and say, please don't cross this boundary, don't smoke in my home, don't smoke near me, but then you come over with your cigarettes and you want to smoke, and then you do, and then I'm like, oh, well, then it wasn't really a boundary if there's no consequence. Even if the consequence is, hey, I'm going to ask you to leave, hey, I'm going to ask you to take that outside, maybe we can't be friends anymore. Understand when part of your responsibility is defining consequences when someone crosses, because the boundary crossers are looking for the consequences. They're actually looking for you not to have consequences, right? I'm going to cross this boundary. I'm going to push, push, push. And when I cross, they're not going to do anything about it. See? Wasn't really a boundary. Didn't mean anything to you. And so now I'm going to go to the next one, because now I can trust that you're not good at holding your own boundaries. And if you're not good at holding this one, which is the outermost boundary, you're certainly not going to be great at holding the ones that get closer and closer to you. Until I've gotten to this place, unfortunately, of violating something about you and then re-wounding that place in ourselves that says, I am untrustworthy to myself. See, I'm not able to protect myself. See, I'm not able to hold my own boundaries. And again, and so then when we have defined ourselves that way, then it's like, well, then my only thing to do is to please, please, please. Because that's another way of what I consider, in quotes, creating safety. But it's a false sense of safety. These are not easy. This is not easy to do. Again, I want to keep validating that this is hard and it is worth doing the work. You need boundaries. You need to define them, articulate them, and be responsible for them. What else did I write? I said boundaries can't be porous. Who are they for? I already told you, everybody. Boundaries are for everybody. In some ways, especially the people closest to you, because they know you so well. And because we want to please and love the people closest to us. We want them to be happy. We want our little baby who's throwing themselves on the floor in the store. We want them to be happy. We don't want to see them in distress. But it's either you or them, right? In some ways, they'll get over their distress. But will you get over the experience of crossing your own boundaries, of mistrust, of not allowing for yourself to stand for you? Boundaries are another way of just articulating, this is what I stand for. And I have to stand for myself. You have to stand for your nose. And that's what boundaries are. And so lastly, this idea of consent, because I know this coming up, it's been coming up, right, for a number of years, especially in relationships and, within those movements between male and female, masculine, feminine, energy in relationships. Here in, like those Me Too movements, here is where our boundaries are so, so important to know. And right, the conversation of in those moments when I didn't realize this was a boundary, and how do we have that really uncomfortable conversation, and what are the consequences when boundaries are crossed? But when we think about consent, we can get so riled up about the need for consent, and did someone ask for consent? And I'm going to ask you, did you define the boundary first? What am I asking for consent around? And yes, there are societal and community things that are just rules of engagement that many of us should know outside of our personal rules of engagement. So I'm not necessarily talking about those types of boundaries or violations. But I'm talking about the ones that are personal to you, that may be more subtle, that may not be just quote unquote known. You should know this about me. You should know better. Whenever we're like, you should do something, can you take a beat and say, but did I articulate that first? What should I have done also in those circumstances? So just where we started, and I said, "Hi, this is your home. May I come in?" I'm asking consent because there's a wall. There's a boundary. I can see it. There's a door, right? There's a lock. I may not always know where your boundary is. And so I may not be asking for consent if I don't know or you haven't articulated where the line is. And again, that might mean, as simple as asking someone out or buying someone a drink or talking to someone, even, or, what else? Sending someone a text or sending someone an email. And then we can go back to these work situations where, if it's not defined in the job, where are you defining where the line is for you? Where are you taking responsibility? And that might be hard to hear as I'm saying it, right? That it's like, that when we're talking about, certainly again, these ideas around consent, that, in an ideal world, well, we don't live there. We don't live in that ideal world. And so if we are expecting for someone else to hold our sense of safety, what are we doing? We are allowing for someone else to have power over us. And if you've listened to any of these podcasts, you know that is the opposite of what I talk about. I'm always, and not only, but always and heavily leaning towards, where can we stand in our own personal power? And not power where we are, subjugating or oppressing someone, but just power so that we can be expansive, so we can be in our own glory, so we can be in our own rootedness. And so consent to me it comes after I define what the boundaries are. Boundaries have to come first. And again, in the bigger picture, the bigger scheme of things, many rules have already been defined, right? Our physical body, there are rules already in the world that should protect us. I'm not necessarily talking about that, but I'm talking about what are the rules of engagement for you in particular, and how can you step into your power so that you feel confident to hold the line and the lines for where and how you want to be treated, how you want people to engage with you in the world, in a way that you can be in the world, as opposed to isolating ourselves in the comfort of our own home, which so many of us are doing right now, right? Because one, there was a pandemic, and so it's hard to kind of sometimes get back out there. It has been hard to get back out there. But also because many of us are afraid. We're afraid. We're afraid to be in relationship with other people. And so I want you to not be afraid. I want you to enjoy this world. I want you to play. I want us to be those children again who say, this is who I am. And, who are you going to be? And are we going to play kitchen together? And what are the rules? And then let's play. These boundaries are allow for you to have your freedom. These boundaries allow for you to feel safe so that you could be in your truest, most authentic nature, so that you could play in this beautiful, glorious, wonderful world. That's what these boundaries are for. That's what these structures are for. That's what these rules are for. Define yourself so that other people can know where you stand, who you are, and so that I can love you more clearly. Let us help each other to do that better. That's it, y'all. So enjoy. Enjoy the rest of your boundary setting. Let me know if you have questions. Yeah. Let me know if you have questions about this. I'm happy to keep talking about this. Send me an email, send me a something, a DM, I guess. And let's keep moving through this, through these topics, so that we can have better relationships in our lives. This is why I'm doing this. Remember, I am going through these things to make your life easier. Boundaries are to make your life easier. People pleasing, being perfect, that is so exhausting. Stop doing exhausting things. Just create a structure. I know I make it sound so easy. It does get easier and easier, though. The more you work on your no's, the more you say them, the easier it gets. So, sending you so much love. I will talk to you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. As always, please share, comment, and like so we can grow our community and bring more love to those you love. Great reviews mean a great deal to our work, so take a few minutes and write us a love letter today. Our hearts appreciate every word. Tune in next week for another episode.